Hi there.
Okay, I'm ready to start whenever.
Okay, thank you. I go ahead with the questions. We are going to have darker nights in Draenor. Are those darker nights also be happening in Azeroth and Outland? And which will be the place with the darkest nights?
I'm not sure that I can answer which is the very darkest, but our goal wasn't necessarily just darkness. It was more making sure that there's contrast between night and day. We definitely took a pass over the old world, over Azeroth. It varies zone by zone. In some zones, you'll see a larger difference than others. I think certainly, Alliance players walking out into Elven Forest, I think we'll notice some, dark night and deep shadows cast by the trees in the moonlight. Other zones that are more wide open or have different lighting, it may be less pronounced, but it's definitely a change that we're making zone by zone across the world.
Okay, thank you. Talking about weather effects, we saw in Wrath of the Lich King before effects like rain and fog to be heavier than they are now in Mists of Pandaria in Azeroth, for instance. Even happening in the capital cities for the Horde and the Alliance. Are we going to have heavier weather effects back alongside the Darker Nights change?
That's something else we're experimenting with. I mean, we still have weather effects. There are some zones where they're going to be used. We haven't specifically gone out of our way to make them heavier, but we're always experimenting with ways to make our environment feel more immersive, feel more natural. We know that there's a certain epic and cool feeling to a heavy rainstorm or a blizzard or a sandstorm, and we'd like to see if we can recapture some of that feel that we used to have.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Another question. The new character models are coming, and so is the option to activate or deactivate them. Various players said to us that they like some of the new models, but not all of them. Will there be an option to select to activate or not the new models at race level?
No. I think ultimately our thought and our hope is that the new models are just improvements across the board over the old ones. And we've been working and listening hard to player feedback and incorporating changes and making adjustments to try to achieve that goal. We understand that obviously when it comes to the look of your own character, there's a lot of strong feelings and a lot of passion. Players have a very vested interest in that appearance. The main reason why we offer the toggle is actually for performance reasons. For players with older computers or less powerful graphics cards, the new models, because they're so much higher resolution, may have a really big impact on performance if you have an old computer. So we want to make sure that we're not forcing you to sacrifice performance just for a prettier appearance. That's why it's an across-the-board toggle one way or the other.
Okay, I get it. And talking about performance, are we going to know for sure if our current PC setting is good for Warlords of Draenor by playing the pre-expansion patch?
Yes. Really the 6.0.2 patch is all of the engine updates, all the graphical updates, pretty much everything about Warlords of Draenor, all the systems features, class changes, item changes, new UI, like the toy box, like the pre-made group finder. It's everything except for the ability to go to Draenor itself and the ability to level beyond 90. That's what we'll unlock with the expansion itself.
Okay. A different question now. Guild levels are going to be part of the pass from now on, and they are going to be retired in this pre-expansion patch. What are your expectations regarding to this change?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. Guild levels are going to be no more, so guilds are going to have levels. What are your expectations regarding to this change?
Okay, yes, I think the guild leveling system we introduced in Cataclysm as a way for people to feel like their guilds had more meaning and that their efforts as a group, as a team, could build up this separate progression on behalf of the guild as a whole. I think it worked well for a time, but now we've reached a point where really most guilds out there are level 25, and getting to level 25 didn't feel like an accomplishment or an achievement. It felt like something that was mandatory in order to be a competitive and viable guild. It was an obstacle for people who wanted to start new guilds or who wanted to start a guild with a small group of friends. And so it more felt like a penalty for people who were missing those things rather than a reward for those who had them. So we just said, okay, really, there are perks to being in a guild. You have a guild bank, you have other features, but we're not going to make you unlock or earn them. All guilds have these things, and players in the guild can enjoy those advantages.
All right, it makes totally sense. Um, Another question. In the pre-expansion event, the Iron Horde is be attacking different strategic points, both of the Alliance and the Horde. Will we need to play a tune on both factions to get the whole of the story from the event, or just playing Alliance or Horde will be enough?
Just playing one or the other will be enough. I mean, there are some slight differences in the text or in the speech, because you may be speaking to Thrall on one hand or Khadgar or someone else on the other, depending on your faction. But the actual objectives you'll have to accomplish and the content that you'll see will be the same for both factions.
Excellent. Now I have some rating-oriented questions. For example, given the number squish, the changes in the racial abilities, stats, the new secondary stats, and the changes in the classes, can we expect any kind of trouble on doing Mist of Pandaria raids because people is still doing the Siege of Orgrimmar?
Yes, I think we've taken a lot of care to make sure that we've retuned our old content, but in particular Siege of Orgrimmar, because we know that it's going to remain relevant to hundreds of thousands of players, if not millions of players, for the weeks until Draenor unlocks. So in general, people should find the experience to feel very similar, if not a little bit easier in some places. There shouldn't be any boss that you could previously defeat in Siege of Orgrimmar that you now will be unable to.
Okay, good. How do you think not having profession bonuses will impact on rating?
I don't think it'll have a huge effect. I think it's ultimately something that we balance around. I think it gives players more freedom to actually choose professions they might like. I think you'll actually see more people who have gathering skills in raids now, because in the past you might have wanted to be able to gather herbs for yourself or to mine nodes to sell in the auction house for profit, but you felt obligated to take a core crafting profession like blacksmithing or enchanting because of the passive bonuses. I think we want people to participate in trade skills because they like the trade skill and that's what they feel fits their character, not because they need some bonus. I don't think we were getting much at all out of the gameplay of someone who was a leather worker. The only leather working they ever did was in the first month of the expansion when they bought a bunch of leather off the auction house, crafted items to get up to the skill level required to unlock the bracer enchants, and then stopped.
Okay. Regarding to the changes in the racial abilities, is there going to be an equilibrium between PvE and PvP for both factions? Because as it is today, at least in the Latin American servers, the PvE high-end guilds are in the Horde, while the PvP oriented guilds are in the Alliance.
Yes, I think that really the path that we did to racials, it began motivated by a need to replace some racials that were no longer going to function because they offered either hit or expertise bonuses, and hit and expertise no longer exist as stats. So we knew we needed to make new racials to replace those. And we took that opportunity to try to add a little bit more balance, because yes, the reality is that certain horde racials, in particular, troll berserking and the orc, blood fury and command, just made horde a higher DPS faction than Alliance, and we saw over time many raiding guilds migrating to the Horde. So I think that overall the balance that we've achieved should make it so that yes, there are some differences, but overall there's no clear advantage to being one faction or the other, and players should feel more free again to choose the race whose appearance they like, whose style and theme they like, rather than the one they feel is going to give them the best performance, because they should be pretty balanced.
Okay, thank you. Regarding to the changes on some spells used in raiding, as Monk is no longer being able to cast Tranquility or it being nerfed down, I'm not really sure. But how those changes, won't them imply a major amount of work for tanks and healers up to a point to become a burden for them?
So I think, if I follow the question correctly, I think the main reason why we pulled back on some of those abilities, particularly among hybrid classes, was that they overshadowed, in many cases, the core roles, such as the healers. The amount of survival that you could get from hybrid Moonkin or Feral Druid Tranquility, or Shadow Priest with V and Halo constantly, or rogues dropping Smoke Bomb, Anti-Magic Zone, etc., often that overshadowed the healer's contributions, and the right answer to damage in raids very often became just stacking lots of other cooldowns. And so we wanted to really make sure that the major healing cooldowns were in the hands of the healers, that when a Resto Druid casts Tranquility, when a Resto Shaman drops Healing Tide, those are the major impactful things that really move health bars, and it's not what the DPS are doing constantly. There are still some cooldowns. I mean, smoke bomb still exists. It's a little bit weaker. Anti-magic zone still exists, but it's a little bit weaker. But ultimately, really, it should be the healers who are filling people's health bars up, and not the DPS who decides to stop for a moment and use a cooldown.
Okay, thank you. Some of the healing spells are not instant cast anymore. We know it was announced that fact is going to be taken into account for future raid encounters, but what about the already existing ones? Has there been any changes to existing raid mechanics?
We didn't necessarily change mechanics, we just changed the outgoing damage. I think this is something that we've always had to deal with in the past. Really, the ability to do so much healing while moving is something that was relatively new towards the end of Cataclysm and over the course of Mists. It was very commonplace in our raid design in earlier years that when we had a lot of movement going on, we had to do less damage as a result because we knew that healers couldn't keep up as effectively. So certainly, fights like Thok, for example, because there are fewer instants that you can cast between his AoE interrupts, we just reduced the damage he does. Garrosh's AoE damage in the temple rooms, where you're constantly dodging his cones and having to heal through periodic AoE damage. We just reduced the damage that does. The mechanic still works totally fine. Healers still have spells they can use. It's just not the most efficient, not their highest throughput ones. But the encounter still plays perfectly fine, and healers can keep up with the damage.
I see. You've made important changes regarding how the movement speed works. Is there going to be a specific stat for it with greater utility in the future?
So movement speed is a tertiary stat that players will be able to get on their items in Draenor. Though that tertiary stats won't be apparent immediately in the 6.0 Siege of Orgrimmar content, but as soon as you go into Draenor, you will start to see them along with other stats like Avoidance and Leech. So players can have some control by customizing their gear over just moving a little bit faster baseline. Because we think ultimately, movement is fun. It's a stat. It's a change to your character that you feel very directly, unlike something else that only shows up in a mathy way in damage meters. You can feel yourself running faster.
All right. With the changes to the glyphs being learned automatically from now on when we level up, is there any love left for those who have chosen inscription as its main profession?
Yeah, so I think the majority of glyphs you still need to go learn from a scribe. You still need to purchase them off the auction house or otherwise get them from someone who's done inscription. We just wanted to make sure that for a new leveling player, there was some baseline of glyphs that you had accessible that you could use. Because particularly for a truly new player, glyphs on the auction house are often pretty expensive. A leveling player on their first character might not have had enough gold to buy those glyphs at all. And then you have this somewhat confusing system where you are leveling and unlocking what seems like a cool new feature at level 25, etc. You unlock a major glyph slot, but you can't really find anything to put in there. So we want to make sure that everyone at least has some basic options, but the majority of your others you're still going to be buying from someone who's done inscription.
Okay. Talking about loot, being it that the equipment will be just plain leather, plate, or whatever, and it will adjust depending on your talents, on your specialization, on your active specialization. Do you think there is going to be a more competition regarding to the loot between paladins, death knights, plate wearer classes for the loot, or will they have still separate loot?
Also, I think there will be more loot that is universally usable by all of them. So a single piece might have more people that rolls on, that want to roll on it or want to bid on it, whatever system you're using. But you'll also see more items more frequently that you as yourself can use. And so it should balance out overall. I think, Holy Paladins, for example, may have been used to having exclusive rights to any plate that had int on it. And they'll have to deal with a bit more competition. But at the same time, well, now there's a whole lot more plate armor that Holy Paladins can actually roll on and take advantage of. I think we wanted to make sure that we avoided a lot of the frustration that often came up when, if your raid didn't have a Holy Paladin at all, every time into plate dropped, it felt like a complete waste. Or if
Yes.
you didn't, you only had a feral druid and a rogue. Every time you got leather with int on it, you just disenchanted it, and everyone was unhappy. There'll be more items that are usable by more people, and there are still spec-specific things in the form of set pieces, and then jewelry and trinkets are also role-specific. So if a healing trinket drops, well, then that's just for the healers. That's not for the mage or the warrior to roll on.
Okay, excellent. We have just one.
Sorry, we have time for one more question. Unfortunately, we have a meeting we have to go to at 11, and we can't be late. So
Sure, no problem. I just have one more question.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, and that's something our fans were keeping to asking us. Why are you taking away the amount from the Siege of Orgrimmar? Is there going to be a way to still attain it in the future, or shall we just say goodbye to it?
Sorry, taking away what from Siege of Orgrimmar?
The amount from killing Garrosh in normal mode.
Yes.
The wolf.
There are currently no further plans to have that mount be attainable. It may show up on something like the Black Market Auction House in the future, but other than that, it really stood for quite some time now as a reward for those players who were able to defeat Garrosh within, on normal difficulty during the year plus that was given to do so. And years from now, the hope is that it does represent a certain achievement. It does represent the fact that you were there in Mists and you accomplished something. There are other wolf mounts out there, and there are certainly hundreds of other mounts across the game. We feel like there's some value to having a few things be limited availability. The same way that in a PvP season, if you don't successfully achieve Gladiator, you're not going to get that Gladiator mount. There's no way to go back and do it later.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ion. It's been a real pleasure to have this small talk with you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.